Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final day of the annual partners meeting. Apologies yesterday for my connectivity issues. I hope you can all hear me now. I only have one admin point to raise, and that's around your names. So first of all, thank you so much for being patient with us. It's our first time organizing a meeting of this nature, and we're getting used to the technology ourselves. But for names, if we are not able to identify you, we are going to message you in the chat. So grateful if you could all open your chat function right now. So if you get a message from the call to action administrator or from Manisha asking you who you are, grateful if you could respond so we know that you're a partner of the call to action or who's joining here legitimately. That would be great. Thank you so much. And that's the only administrative point. I will now give it over to Joan to start us off on the first session.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Joan again from the Women's Refugee Commission. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, early evening to all our colleagues. Most of what we'll be doing this morning is taking a deeper dive into the updated roadmap. So our new 2021-2025 roadmap, and thanks to those colleagues who've helped along with the drafting and reviewing, etc. I think there were a number of points that came up in our first 2 days related to advocacy, funding, field implementation, support for national and local partners that will be quite relevant to today's discussion too. So as we take a look at how we're going to take this roadmap forward, we're going to go outcome by outcome with a couple colleagues facilitating the sessions, and we'll look at each outcome and think about what are some of the particular gaps we know we want to address under the updated roadmap, and what are some actions we can do that to really get the kind of impact that we want. If you can, I'd suggest that you have the draft roadmap in front of you so you can go have the outcomes in front of you as our presenters present, if you're able to do that. And we'll go about 20 minutes per outcome. And again, I think as many of you know, the outcome area, the topics of the outcome are the same in this roadmap as the previous roadmap, but the actions are updated significantly. So with that, I am going to turn it over. We're going to look at outcome 1, which is on policies and frameworks. Do we all have the policies and capacities in place to take this work forward effectively? And I am going to turn it over to the dynamic duo of April from OCHA and Milka from CARE, who are going to take us through this first discussion on outcome 1. So over to you, Milka and April.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Joan. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm going to share my screen and walk us through this first outcome. Let's see, this will work. Sorry, seem to be having some challenges. Really apologize. I'm having some issues sharing my screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen. Is that a yes? I hope everybody can see the screen. Is that right? Good. Yes, awesome. Okay, so I'll walk us really quickly through this first outcome, which, as Joan mentioned, is an outcome. The first outcome is the outcome that is focused on putting in place humanitarian policies, institutional policies, system-wide policies, standards, the foundational infrastructure to address GBV and promote gender equality that will enable us to do all the work that we want to do. So just very quickly, this is going to be kind of an outline of what we will be discussing today. We'll talk about the key action areas or do a very quick overview of the key action areas. Talk about some of the things that have been highlighted on the online forum. So really appreciate those who were able to go on the online forum this past 3 or so weeks and provide a little bit of input. And so we're just going to try and synthesize that. And then we will hopefully have some time at the end to have a bit of a discussion, which April will lead. Okay, so these are the key action areas, which you all should have in front of you if you have the roadmap in front of you. Just really quickly, as you can see, they relate to accountability. So adopting, implementing, evaluating policies and systems to ensure accountability on GBV. Around staffing, so putting in place the human resources and the staff capacity to address GBV and advance gender equality. Integration, making sure that we're actually integrating GBV and gender into kind of more system-wide and institutional policies. So not just the ones that are our own institutional policies, but the ones that are system-wide policies and guidelines and tools, making sure that GBV is part of that. Localization, as we've talked about over the past couple of days, there's a really strong focus in this new roadmap, I think, a really good, strong focus on ensuring that local actors, particularly women's organizations, are supported in terms of funding, but also as far as this particular outcome is concerned, in terms of developing and implementing policies and capacity to strengthen GBV and promote gender equality. Resources, which has been a recurring theme in our discussions this past couple of days as well. How do we make sure that we allocate sufficient both financial and human resources to ensure implementation of these policies that we are adopting? And finally, advocacy, which again has come up quite a bit in the past couple of days. How do we make sure that we are doing advocacy and influencing key actors across the system, across the humanitarian system, to ensure implementation of these policies and ensure accountability as well. So just to go very quickly to sorry, I'm just gonna see if I can move. Okay, here we go. Just going really quickly to some of the themes and the issues and the responses and the reflections that we got on the online forum discussion around this outcome area, specifically around the question of what has been over the past at least 5 years of the roadmap's implementation. What do we feel some of the key achievements have been as far as the roadmap outcome 1 is concerned? So around policies and guidance and tools and so on, as I mentioned. One of the things that came up is there's a sense that, you know, we actually have made progress in establishing and updating policies within our own institutions, as well as system-wide policies on GBV and gender. I actually think this is an area where we've actually seen quite a bit of progress. If we look back to a few years ago, or a number of years ago, when the call to action started, compared to now, lots of new policies at all levels, states and donors, own national policies and donor policies, international organizations, UN agency policies, as well as NGOs themselves putting in place policies. And then we have the more system-wide work that has been done to put in place policies and guidance, including some of the things that have been mentioned over the past couple of days, things like the GBV accountability framework, the GBV minimum standards, and other really great important tools and guidance. One of the really interesting reflections that came up on the online forum by someone who said, you know, it's not enough that we have these policies, and that's true. A policy is just the beginning. Then the real work begins. You know, then you really have to think about what do you need to do in terms of capacity building, in terms of ensuring you have the training and the tools and the assessments and the reporting to ensure actual implementation and accountability around this policy. So I hope we'll have some time at the end to talk about some of the reflections that some people were able to provide on the online forum around their own institutional experience. The other thing that came up as a key achievement on the online forum, which I really agree with, is this idea of, we have been able to do a lot more advocacy as a collective and as individual organization institutions to ensure action on GBV policies and commitments. And that came up as well this past couple of days, that there's been a sense that, yeah, we are doing more advocacy. The question though is whether this is actually translating into more funding and action. And we can probably discuss that at the end and hear from people about whether they think the advocacy has made a difference. Just really quickly, being conscious of time, the gaps and barriers discussion, really thinking about, what are the things that we see as remaining challenges and gaps and barriers around this outcome area. I will not rehash what has been discussed again in the past couple of days, because I feel like we have been raising and talking about issues that we identify as gaps, including shortfalls in funding. Capacity gaps have been identified, and specifically around, in this case, I think, just looking at some of the progress reports that have been pulled together around, based on our call to action annual self-reports. This has come up as an area recurringly, as an area of concern, as a weakness, that we continue to have capacity gaps across the system, and shortfalls when it comes to staff, capacity to implement policies and to do our GBV programming in the standards and quality that is required. And then just really quickly, integration of GBV across system-wide policies and standards. I think people, it's been identified as an area where there has been some progress actually, but I think there is a sense, as we talked about, again, I think it was on the first day, that more could be done, more could be done, or we could see, it'd be great to see more action and more systematic incorporation of GBV into system-wide policies, standards, tools, HRPs and HNOs being an example of that. And then just talking about, again, about one of the issues that again has been a recurring challenge: how do we ensure and support the engagement of local and women's organizations in GBV decision making? So I'm going to turn it over to April, and I'm hoping that we have at least, 10 minutes or so to kind of reflect on what I shared. Some of you were not able to provide input into the online forum. This is an opportunity to hear from you. And then, yeah, let's just talk about some of the questions we have on the screen. April, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks, Milka, for leading this discussion. And we really wanted to use this opportunity to get some inputs from you in terms of, what do you see as being some of the remaining gaps, building on what we've just discussed, but also how do we overcome that? I mean, I'm struck by some of our discussions over the last few days where, we really acknowledge that we have moved a long way in terms of the visibility for GBV, but that it's not translating into, funding or to other concrete impacts. So how do we improve that accountability? And I would love to hear from some of you, especially if you've not engaged in the forum with us. So very open to hearing from you in terms of, what are some of the key ways in which, we can address some of these gap areas, and in particular to strengthen this accountability. And I'm sorry, I can't see hands raised, so you might just have to come in. Anyone? Don't be shy. You can also just blame OCHA and just say, it's because of OCHA that we're not making traction. I'm totally
April, April, Richard has raised his hand. Richard Tenney from South Sudan, apparent, I think.
Okay, great. Richard, go ahead.
Thank you, April. And I think we should change your name to June because we are now in June.
I'm behind the times.
Yes, I would just like to highlight something that is related to HRP and HNO. And I think that is an area where there is still a gap. And actually, from a perspective of somebody from OSHA, for you, I think this would be an area where you could be able to do a push and make sure that in the HRP we have more GBB coming out, and especially how funding for women-led and local and national organization is actually prioritized. We have raised this locally in our respective country office and said, if there's funding is coming through, then could there be ceiling? And I think somebody was asking, I think in this forum, and said, either consideration given to women-led organization or national organization when the country full fund is allocated. And I remember I mentioned, I said no. I think if we have South Sudan, for example, is allocated 30 million for first round of allocation, and say out of these, maybe 10% or 5% of this will go to women-led organization or to national organization, and the main focus would be this. So the competition would be actually around those women and national organization rather than the all INGOs, national organization, and women-led, and it become very tough. I remember this year, for example, we had shifted maybe to a different system of SSHF, where there was integration, where about 5 clusters, protection, NFI, or health and nutrition, combined together. And that means literally all the national organizations were kicked out because the amount that is required was a ceiling that could only be absorbed by an INGO. And INGO were told, yes, they can, they have an option to partner with a national organization or not. And those who felt that they had the opportunity to go alone, they went alone. So it means the percentage that would go to national organization or women-led organization for this matter would be almost nothing. And that means there will be little that will be done in relation to protection and GBB. Or it would just be a drop in the ocean, like an integration or mainstreaming.
I mean, certainly, I think this issue around prioritization of women-led organizations for country-based pool funds and other humanitarian funding mechanisms is something that we're all trying to work towards. But I think there are particular blockages, and I'm just monitoring some of the discussions in the chat, where people are saying it is very much based on the prioritization at the country level, right? So, in one place you might have, an operation that or a humanitarian coordinator that prioritizes, these issues, or you get a bit more traction. But I think, going back to your point, it shouldn't be. I think we need to start systematizing some of this so that it's not just contingent on whether you have, a leader that is supportive or not at the country level. It should be mandated that, all HCTs or all HCs must have, this percentage that you're talking about, that is dedicated to women's organizations. Sorry, there's 2 hands up and I can't see who they are. Do you want to come in, whoever's got their hand up?
Yeah, I think Micah's got her hand up. Micah, do you want to go next? Sorry, let me see if I can unmute you.
Micah and Grace.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. I think starting with maybe, as much as we like to hear that people are increasing attention to GBB sort of rhetorically, I think we also have to recognize that this works against us. That it's not just with COVID, we've seen this in other emergencies as well. Once it gains sort of the media attention and the attention of people in speeches like Secretary General, that there's this perception that there is a tension in terms of actual action on the ground and resources that are accompanying that. And in fact, there aren't, and therefore, like, we're struggling actually even more when it's not recognized at all. So I think that's like a first step maybe for all of us to recognize that this is a real problem when the rhetoric doesn't match the action. But then something in terms of specific commitments that I would like to see, I think we all recognize that with the local organizations, there are a tremendous number of dedicated organizations around the world truly focused on this issue. But at the global level, we have none. We literally have 0 organizations at the global level that are entirely committed to addressing GBV. And that's been a problem for our sector for a long time. I think, you know, even our coordinating agency is focused also, and maybe more especially, on sexual reproductive health. So what I would like to see at the global level, those organizations at the global level engaged in advocacy at the global level and within the humanitarian architecture, that they make real commitments to dedicate core funding to GBV as a sector of real focus and attention, and that they also appoint senior staff. Because we often just don't have the right representation, and I think it's unacceptable that UNFPA hasn't had the senior GBV position filled in over 2 years as a coordinating agency. I think that these are some real clear expectations we could set for agencies. I'm not just trying to call out UNFPA here. That goes for my organization, that goes for a lot of INGOs as well. Like, really show us that you have the intention to put a priority focus on this issue by way of funding, like that core funding, that, you know, overhead funding, and also senior staff.
So that's like a commitment that is a suggestion to take up with UNFPA as the lead on GBV. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I would like, I mean, this is about different organizations making commitments, right? So, I mean, we could recommend specific recommendations maybe for certain commitments by organization, but that is something that I would like to see a number of organizations commit to.
Yeah.
We will maintain core funding for certain positions, and maybe to take initial action in emergencies, because it shouldn't always rely on donors to come through after so many weeks. Like, what is the intention to dedicate core funding so that we can respond in emergencies with the existing funds, like with the funds of that organization at the global level? Things like that to really show the intention to put investment in it, not just we'll do it if you know, the funding comes through, or we'll do it if we're put under pressure, but that we see this as one of our priorities and we're investing in ourselves.
Colleagues, I hate to be the harsh moderator, but we probably have time for one more comment or question, and then we need to move on to outcome 2.
And I think we had, who was it that was on?
It was Grace, I think.
Right.
Grace. Hi. Yeah, I'll be quite fast with this. I think it really follows from what Mika has said. I think the other commitment that we can rally ourselves around is really the models of supporting GBV actors at national level and maybe subnational level. I think it's been very interesting to hear from you know, women-led activists, as well as, you know, our partners like Richard and Yusuf, about their experiences in country. And what happens is, if there's only one, maybe 1 or 2 slots, you know, in any coordination, both GBV or just other humanitarian action, is that there has to be a rotation at some point. And if that, you know, that resource and that experience gets diminished after, you know, some time. So when you're not in that leadership role, because it also has to be democratic. But one of the challenges they face is really how to sustain their voice as well as legitimacy. So we might have a women-led organization that is sitting in the, you know, in a decision-making space for a year or 2, but they're really struggling in terms of how to consolidate voices. They don't have, you know, support for that broader networking or broader, you know, institutionalized or linking with other CSOs and other national organizations. So I think the kind of commitment I would propose for us to consider is, as those of us maybe who are intermediaries, that would be NGOs and UN agencies maybe working in this space. Our models as we fundraise for decision making to include networking, networking costs, as well as to maintain a very active input from a broader cross-section of CSOs and national NGOs into these spaces. It's not just an individual supporting an individual. You can go in as a co-lead or joint consortia, but support that voice to be rooted in a broader civil society movement. So and include those costs in our work as we fundraise for to continue GBV work.
Great. So thanks a lot, Grace, and thanks to April and Milka. It's not easy to do in the time that we have. I think we've all noticed there's a really good chat as well. So I guess we can both capture the chat and some of the key points in that in the report that follows the meeting. And also, I think if people can go into the forum and put some of these comments in there, that would also help us as well. Thanks so much for that. We're going to move on to outcome 2, which is on coordination. And it's both improving and strengthening coordination within the GBV sector and then with the GBV sector and other sectors, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Appio, who is going to guide us through this piece. Christine.
Many thanks, John. I'm Christine Appio, and I'm going to take us through the second outcome, which is on coordination. I believe that all of you have had the chance to look at the outcome area, so I will not sort of repeat it. So share my, okay. So very briefly, diving into the achievements, first I would like to recognize that there were very few inputs on the online forum. So did a lot of bilateral engagements with different actors, including with the GBV AOR, which leads coordination. So in terms of the achievements, we have one, GBV AOR resources and support options, which have extensively been availed to support initiatives in the field. I'm happy to cite the handbook for coordinating GBV in emergencies, which was launched last year, the updated and launched last year, and the minimum standards. But also the scale up of the REGA team has expanded support to the fields team, as well as geographical coverage. You look at the other resources in the presentation later, which will be shared. In terms of the HNO, overall, I think we have seen a lot of progress in terms of increased profiling of GBV needs and requirements in the HNO, as well as in the sector plans. And this is a positive progress that needs to be acknowledged as real progress. And I have a statistic here showing that in 52% of HNOs this year, there was clear effort to integrate GBV throughout the crisis context. Of the 21 countries with an HNO, 71% have separate paragraph on GBV, which is progress. I'd like to mention that on the HRP, but 92% of HRPs include a specific section in the response strategy. This is a clear improvement since 2019, where only 46% of HRPs had a dedicated GBV section. Okay. We have also seen increased collaboration with other clusters on risk mitigation. When you look at the GBVOR 2020 survey, it shows improved collaboration between GBV subclusters and other sectors on GBV mitigation and integration. For instance, health and WASH, as the improvement has really gone up. However, a lot needs to be done with some sectors, such as food and nutrition, among others. Gaps and barriers. I won't go through all of them because of time, but I would like to mention our resources for sustained GBV coordination, which continues to be a challenge. About 29% of the coordinators are dedicated and 9% outside contracts. And that is from the GBV 2020 survey. However, we have seen longer term contracts for coordinators and less on site, which is some progress made. I would like to ask Leigh Ashley, our rega for Asia Pacific, to highlight some other issues that she had raised. Leigh Ashley, if you have like 1 minute. How do I unmute? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you everyone for having me here. I really enjoyed the previous session comments, so I try not to repeat so much, but I can give you a few examples from our region of these gaps. So for example, in the entire Asia Pacific region, we only have one dedicated GBV coordinator at this time, and yet it's the region that's most affected by natural disasters in terms of frequency. So what we find is that it is a constant scramble to re-justify why coordination is important for each emergency. So I think long-term planning for the coordination, even in natural disaster affected responses and complex responses, will really make a difference in the progress moving forward. And similarly for dedicated coordinators, we find most of those are, well, all of those in our region are double or even triple hatting. And this again speaks to the point of need for coordination and also appreciation of the different areas for gender equality in PSEA, because often it's one person coordinating all 3 or even 4 of those areas: GBV, gender, PSEA. So it becomes quite complicated to give any of those the time that each of them deserve. I'd like to raise one other issue here, which is the demands on coordination to show results, because not only in Asia Pacific, but actually every region I work, I've seen, increased demands on coordinators and subclusters to show that they're making a difference through evidence. And unfortunately, that evidence is usually still interpreted in terms of showing the number of survivors or prevalence. So I think we have a lot more work to do in terms of capacity building other sectors, but also very importantly, leadership on what results means in terms of GBV and emergencies. So in terms of moving forward, I think commitments on what we can do on both advocacy, but also capacity building packages for leadership levels on what GBV and emergencies is and why coordination is important could make a difference in our progress. And then last, I just point out that getting the right actors to the table and keeping them there is really what's going to make a difference in coordination moving forward. Again, reflecting the point on women's organizations have limited resources to engage in coordination. I think this is an area rich for collaboration with gender equality groups and actors. And tied to this is our need to take our global packages and really invest in localizing them. And 2 examples, we did this in Myanmar recently in Northern Shan State, and then last year with Yemen, where we really took time to translate them and coach the coordinators so that they could roll it out in local languages in their area. And at least from the Asia Pacific language, I think investing in that long-term localization of training packages beyond the 5 official UN languages will really make a difference to so many people in our region. So I think I'll leave it for there for now. Back to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah Ashley, for that very important highlights. So in terms of, now we will go to the key action areas in the updated roadmap in terms of looking at model, the kind of commitments that needs to be made under this outcome. So it would be interesting to hear from the GBVL coordinator on the kinds of model collective commitments that needs to be made. So Jennifer Chase, the coordinator of the Global AOR, would say something here. Jennifer? Hello, Jennifer? Okay. If Jennifer is not, maybe I'll move on and come back to her later.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, my computer went off for a second there. Yeah, I'll be even quicker than Leah Ashley because I know you have a long presentation. So I just want to say in terms of coordination, I feel like there's increasing push for, and it is the role, I think, of coordinators to be very involved at the field level with strategic senior leadership at the HCT level with the HCs. And also, you know, we're always asking them to be very much in touch with remote and rural areas and with subnational levels. And there's a lot of demands made rolling out the minimum standards, the accountability framework, many, many different tasks. And we've seen that when we have co-coordinators, we're able to tackle a lot more of these issues and demands and do it more effectively. And now we really are encouraging to have women-led organizations also being coordinators and also taking important decisions. And I think for this to happen, we really need funding. It's not just a choice of saying like, oh yes, let's have a co-coordinator who wants to step up. People can't step up without the funding. So this is an appeal to our donors. And we have seen in Afghanistan very recently, and also in Gaziantep, we've actually had 3 coordinators where we have an UN, an INGO, and a NNGO or a local organization or a women's-led organization. Yemen is where we have the Women's Union, and that has seen, it helps really with reaching through the women's networks to the field level in a very comprehensive way. So the co-leadership is one of my sort of asks. And then another one is around women-led organizations. If we want to really respond to the affected population, we need to be engaged in partnership with women-led organizations. And then my third point, which actually fits very much into what Leah Ashley just said, is data collection and information management continues to be a very challenging area. And we are increasingly asked to show evidence. And I feel like with the COVID-19, again, all over again, we're asked to see after only 3 months, we're supposed to already show impact. And so I think this whole situation of needing to look at how to collect data and having the people, again, human resources, to do that. And that also requires training because there's very few people that have a profile of both data and GBV. So a lot more training needs to happen for that as well. And I'm gonna leave it at there because I know your time is limited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Chase, for sharing the kind of commitments. Sorry, trying to move my slide. Okay, on outcome 2.2, I would like to hear from OCHA Gender Advisor April on how they think this action can be taken forward in the updated roadmap. And what kind of model or collective commitments that she would like to see partners making. So April Pham, if you're there, could you say something within 2 minutes?
What am I saying?
I mean, tell us, do you have any specific thoughts on what kind of model collective commitments partners can make to strengthen coordination between GBV, PSEA, and gender equality actors
Yep.
in the field?
Yeah, sure. And certainly, we have started the discussion on this already, and and certainly we don't want to put all the onus on the GBV, coordinators or GBV actors. But I do think there is, a space for that coordination to happen between all of those actors. I don't have an actual model commitment of some sort, but I do think, in countries where you do have, say, a gender working group, a PSEA, working group, and a GBV coordination mechanism, that those three coordinators should be working, more closely together to at least be aligned with their messaging, because it shouldn't be so far apart in terms of what they're promoting, right? So in the PSEA meetings, for example, we should be having much more systematic discussions around referral pathways, and ensuring that, survivors of SEA are also supported through the established mechanisms. And vice versa, in the gender working groups, there should be discussions around, what is happening and what is the response on GBV and how they can support that. Because I think, going back to some of the issues and gaps that we've highlighted previously, has been that there is this, this disconnect between all of these groups, when in my mind, and I keep saying this, that it's actually the one group. But maybe the space for this coordination is the interagency, the ICCG, which is the intercluster coordination mechanism. Maybe that's where some of these groups can come together, but I don't know what that looks like yet. And I would be very keen to hear from others, if there are good coordination models that are already being trialed in some other places.
Thank you, April Pham. Please provide, if there are good coordination models as requested by April, please use the chat, makes a suggestion there. So in terms of key action area 2.3, which is on, ensure coordination on risk mitigation, but mainly strengthening coordination between GB specialized actors and clusters and sectors. We have here a few suggested commitments that can be made. One is that, want to see donors can ensure that GBV and protection are included in proposals from other sectors and clusters. The action on integrating GBV essential services in preparedness and contingency plans for across all the clusters. This is a critical commitment that needs to be undertaken, and the need to link GBV risk mitigation to anger and climate change, the food security and nutrition sectors. If you look at the GBV ORI survey, still the collaboration, while it has with food security stands at 59%, nutrition and 40%, which is something that needs to be further improved. So in terms of action 2.4, which is on integration, there are about 3 model commitments or collective. One is building on the progress from the HNO HRP, which I earlier spoke about, and building on the Oslo commitments by OCHA, prioritizing GBV at the field level, including pool funds. It is something that we can further build on to strengthen integration, GBV and gender equality. And given the fact that the terms of reference for the HCs exist, as well as the HCT compact, there's a need to advocate for the implementation of this. On action 2.5, which is on localization, we're suggesting there are about two areas. One, work as a collective to set up pool funding targeting women's organizations. It's donors, IOs, INGOs working together. And then the other is the need to coach and mentor women-led organizations to lead and engage in GBV coordination and other humanitarian coordination mechanisms, including in pool fund steering committees. And these needs resources and funding. On key action 2.6, which is on resources, there are two possible commitments that partners can make. One is to allocate resources for GBV coordination and information management. So that's funding for coordinators and IMOs, which we acknowledge still remains a huge gap across all regions. UNFPA, as the lead agency, is aware of their particular accountability as lead agency, and this is part of their strategy. However, a collective effort is still needed to take this forward. And then the need to fund women-led organization for coordination function, which Jennifer has already mentioned, so I won't delve much into that. And then 2.7, which is on advocacy, suggesting about 4 key areas, but for time, because of time, I'll just mention 2, which is to ensure collective senior level advocacy by all stakeholder groups, and strengthen advocacy skills of women-led organization, but most importantly, ensuring that our organizations hear their voices. So this, maybe to mention something about this, during the call to action pilots in the field, some of the women-led organizations express challenges in conducting advocacy, or even when they advocate, they are not always heard. So it's important that call to action partners commit to actually hear this organization, but also to strengthen their capacity to advocate for themselves and for their own communities. So that is it for me. So I'm going to take you back to John in case of any questions or comments or inputs for moderation.
Okay, so Christine, thank you so much, and also the other colleagues that contributed to that section. You really did a lot in a very short period of time. There was also, I think we also thought there was some really good data in that presentation. So just to remind colleagues again, that everyone will have access to all the PowerPoints, because I thought there was some really useful information that was in this PowerPoint too. And lots in the chat. So again, to the extent we can capture that in the forum, that's great. I think what we'll do before, if anyone has a comment they absolutely want to make right now, please, I can't really see it, but perhaps Christine can see if you raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll move on to outcome 3.
Lee Ashley's got her hand up. I don't know if she wants to speak.
Maybe someone who hasn't spoken yet?
No, my apologies, but I'm lowering my hands.
Thanks, Lee.
Fatima's got her hand up.
Who does? Fatima?
Yes.
Okay, Fatima, Christine, can you unmute Fatima?
Yep. Go ahead, Fatima.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, John. I think it's just to emphasize on what has earlier been stated by Jennifer and also seconded to by Christine on the need to actually fund co-coordinator positions for women-led organizations, because this is a very practical challenge that we face here on the field. We go all over the world advocating for women-led organizations to actually be in leadership positions, especially within coordination at the GBV subsector. However, we have a lot of women-led organizations that are willing to take that role, but we all know that is also a very demanding position that needs to be funded. So I remember coming back from Nairobi where we had this workshop and where we had our priorities that we intend to come back and implement at field level. We advocated, we even wrote a project, we included in a proposal the need to fund the position for women-led organizations. Unfortunately, it has not scaled through. So I am really surprised that, you know, all these actors are aware and are still pushing, but it's so slow to come. I do not understand how we would expect organizations to take such really important but very demanding position without actually providing the fund to do so. So UNFPA, I think, should be able to take that responsibility to ensure that within the GBV sector, at least one position should be funded by the organization as a start, probably to impress the donors, to show them that this is a workable idea, and from there we can advocate for more. But the more time we spend talking about these things, the more time passes by. So I think it's just to emphasize on the need to have women's voices within the coordination at level, talking about within the coordination of the GBV sector itself and how we need to actually fund that position. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent advocacy point, Fatima, and commitment point as well. So thank you very much. Christine, big thanks to you for walking us through, and also to the other colleagues, Lee and others who contributed. We are going to move on now to outcome 3, and I am going on, which is on data assessment and analysis, and I'm going to turn that over to Christine from UNICEF.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to work on sharing my screen. It's also funny that Christine Appio and I ended up back to back because people always confuse us for each other. So funny how that worked out. Also, I just want to flag for people that I'm going to hide the chat because otherwise I'm going to get way too distracted. But Erin Patrick has graciously offered to track it, and then we can pick up any of the key points at the end. So I hope that's okay with people. I don't want you to feel like I'm ignoring you. Okay, hopefully that looks okay. We are moving now into outcome 3, which is data assessment and analysis. And quite a number of these points have already come up in other presentations. So I think, you know, we're in a good spot for having a more detailed conversation about this. I thought we could just have a little refresher first of the different key action areas. These aren't the exact wording in the roadmap, but just for an attempt to try and save space on the slide, I've just sort of captured the key ideas and categories. So the first one is around integration of GBV and gender into other sectors IM tools and also intersectoral processes. Consultation with women and girls, localization, resources. So we've heard this one come up a lot, right? Dedicating human and financial resources for safe and ethical data collection and IM, and then advocacy around good practice related to GBV data. In the forum, there was not a ton of action on this topic. I would like to thank Lena for her thoughtful comments, but we didn't have a ton to pull from the site itself. So I did, you know, just kind of put some feelers out to colleagues who are working on these issues day to day, and this is a reflection of both the few comments that came up in the forum, but also just kind of what I heard from the temperature check that's out there. So just a couple themes that I think we want to be thinking about when it comes to commitments. And again, I heard a lot of these already being raised. The first one at the top is around, you know, data collection and reporting. So things like sex and age disaggregated data and other sort of like thinking about GBV related risks. We're seeing improvements in that, I would say, but that's not the same as meaningful analysis and using that information to really inform program decisions and to make changes and to have it be central to our ongoing M&E and the way that we make changes as we go. So that has come up quite a bit, the need to strengthen not only the fact that we're collecting and reporting things like sex and age disaggregated data and GBV risk analysis, but how we're actually using it in a meaningful way. The second circle on the right is about consultations with women and girls as a core component of what we do in assessments and GBV data, right? So I think, again, with this one, we've probably seen some improvements on initial needs analysis, initial needs analysis and assessment, including consultations with women and girls sometimes. But I think we're not seeing it nearly enough in ongoing M&E. So that's something that we've been working a lot on with other sectors. But I think, you know, thinking about commitments to where we can really make that a central component of M&E is an opportunity that we have right now. The one on the bottom is, you know, as we're thinking about, you know, all of this localization and how we bring local women's organizations and women and girls themselves into our thinking about data and M&E and analysis, you know, really being deliberate and thoughtful to design the processes in a way that's not just extractive, right? That it's a two-way collaboration. So not just collecting data from them, but making sure they're part of the process of designing the system, being part of the analysis, and also receiving feedback about what's going to happen as a result of that information. The next circle, kind of going around the left bottom, has been coming up a lot. The fact that when many people hear GBV data, they automatically think of prevalence, or they think about the number of cases that have been reported in a given emergency. And, you know, we've been doing a lot of work around advocacy, that the broader category of what we should be considering as GBV data is much wider than that. And also, you know, not only the need for advocacy around safety and ethics related to GBV data, but also just about what's practical, what type of data is practical for what purposes. You know, we know that just analyzing increase or decrease in the number of reported cases can't really tell us that much if we don't have other information available. So really thinking about opportunities for reinforcing that message. And I think the point you made, Jen, about COVID is something that we're seeing as well. You know, I think we've, to a certain extent, you know, really reinforced that message around, you know, don't wait for evidence, don't wait for proof in terms of reported cases to take action on GBV. We've made progress on that in humanitarian circles, but now that COVID is, you know, in new contexts, I think we're seeing those conversations come up a lot more again. And then obviously GBV information management capacity, as others have raised, it's kind of a unique combination of skill sets to have both the GBV and the information management, and so how we can think about improving on that as a community. These are just some other developments and potential entry points that people have raised that, you know, we can be thinking about sort of building off of or leveraging. So obviously the GBV minimum standards has a dedicated standard on GBV data, actually a few of them related to GBV data, if we use the broader definition. And also there's a conversation happening around next steps for M&E for the minimum standards. So many of you have probably been involved in the survey that went out, and soon there will be the results shared. So opportunities there to think about. There is a capacity building initiative happening through the GBV IMS steering committee, all about case management capacity building, but linking that to safe and ethical survivor data management. So maybe something in there. All the work that's been happening with the GBV guidelines. So there's a specific work stream on measurement of the effectiveness of GBV risk mitigation. Some of you may have seen this AAQ term thrown around, but that's availability, accessibility, acceptability, and quality. It's essentially a little modified framework that we stole from health that we've been using in the GBV guidelines work, and quite a lot of sectors have picked it up just to look at different potential barriers to accessing their services and how that could be linked to GBV risk. Obviously the localization work stream, so thinking about, again, how we make those consultations and the working hand in hand with local women's organizations really a core part of what we do on the data side. And also other sectors and clusters have really, you know, over the last few years made a lot of progress on integrating GBV risk analysis and safe and ethical data into their own tools. So ways that we can try to leverage that. Thinking about commitments, these are just some ideas that came up in conversations that I've been having. The orange ones are actually directly aligned with the accountability framework, so putting in another little plug there. including GBV risk assessment as a mandatory component of proposals for all sectors. So I think that would apply to donors and international organizations funding those proposals, but also for organizations creating those proposals, right? Is there a quality checklist that would include GBV risk assessment before it even gets submitted to a donor? Meeting directly with local organizations and women's groups to hear their views on response priorities. So this one, I think the way it's located in the accountability framework is targeted at HCTs and senior management, but I think, you know, there's opportunities for all to tap into that in different ways. Integrating GBV into pooled fund strategies and criteria for funding decisions. I think that links a lot to some of the conversations we've had around HNO and HRPs already. Advocacy and policies on GBV data. So again, there's the one, this specific one on survivor data in the GBV minimum standards, standard 14, but there are others on M&E as well. And then additional two that are not directly linked to the accountability framework, but obviously have linkages. The capacity building on GBV information management. We heard a lot about that, and I really liked the point that was raised earlier about not only capacity building for technical staff, but also for management, right? And I think within UNICEF, we're also looking at colleagues who play a role in data collection and analysis, but don't necessarily work on GBV. So our M&E colleagues that work in child protection, for example, and how can we make them build their skills just a little bit more on the basics of safe and ethical GBV data management. And then the final one, consultations with women and girls, is a standard component of M&E. And I thought it would be interesting to think about, well, I guess all of these, but particularly the last two as, you know, opportunities not only for our own individual commitments, but potentially also for collective commitments. So that's it. I'm gonna try and get my screen to a place where I can see what's going on.
Christine Yusuf has his hand up.
Wonderful, thanks, Erin. Yusuf, would you like to come in? Do I have to unmute you? Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody in Nigeria. I just want to make a comment on the GBV IMS capacity, particularly as it relates to local CSOs. Clearview Integrity Foundation has been privileged to be trained by the UNFPA some years back as part of the second batch of trainees on the GBV IMS. And I just want to observe that there's a lot of gap in the rollout of the GBV IMS on the ground. In our work with local actors here, you will discover that not many organizations that collect data on GBV have been trained on the GBV IMS. Last year, there was the first ever national conference on GBV organized by the Office of the Nigerian Vice President. And over 300 participants convened in the State House in Abuja. And out of the 300 participants, when a question was asked about the GBV IMS, I was the only person that was trained on the GBV IMS all over Nigeria out of 300 participants. And here in Adamawa State, where we are headquartered, in interacting with the police, the NSCDC, the Civil Security Agency, the prisons people, the army, and all other agencies collecting GBV data, they are not trained in the GBV IMS. And so if you have a go at their records, you will find identifiable information clearly, you know, the names, the phone numbers, the addresses, and so on and so forth. And one major problem that we're even having with our courts, with all the high increase in rape and GBV, lawyers will take the GBV cases to court and misclassify, mischaracterize. Rape will be classified as maybe defilement or assault or something, you know, simply because the lawyers themselves are not being trained in the GBV IMS, so there is no standardization in nomenclature. So there is a huge, huge gap on the ground concerning the rollout of GBV IMS as the standard tool, you know, for collecting GBV data. And as Christine was saying, it's not just about collecting prevalence or incidence data. There is a whole lot involved in the GBV IMS that will give us a lot of information on GBV in a particular context, but it is not, there's a lot of gap in rolling out and training and capacity building of local CSOs, as well as all agencies that are collecting GBV data. And finally, Just yesterday, we have interns who are working with us on GBV in Emergencies, a new program of the UNFPA and the American University here in Nigeria. And we have 2 interns, and we have started teaching them this GBV IMS thing, so that it will be one of those things they are learning during their internship. So I just want to say that it's important we prioritize the rollout of the GBV IMS. I hear that there's a GBV IMS Plus now or something on the ground, so that more local organizations, more women-led organizations, and all security agencies collecting GBV are well trained as far as GBV is concerned. And with respect to commitments, I am feeling, as a local CSO, I'm feeling very powerless when you lump me up together with INGOs. You know, just say NGOs. The commitments that INGOs and other big organizations can make, I cannot make. And that is why when they are talking, I cannot talk. So, but if perhaps you could unbundle us local CSOs and give us what commitments we can make at our own level, what is expected of us at our own local level, within our own capacity, within our own strengths, within our own challenges, then that will help me to know, as a local CSO on the ground, what can I do and what will I not be able to do? And then you can follow me up with the accountability framework and say, okay, I made this commitment, I've been faithful to it, and so on and so forth. So these are just a few thoughts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf, much appreciated. And I totally hear you. And I think many of us have felt and have directly experienced, you know, the challenges around capacity gaps, specifically related to survivor data and the GBV-IMS and all of those challenges. And I think the point is really well taken about, you know, thinking about ways that we can craft or work together to craft some language that would be commitments more relevant specifically to civil society organizations, local NGOs, national NGOs. That's not necessarily generic and would be exactly the same for other NGOs at international level. So thanks for that. In terms of, are there other hands up? No, right? Okay. In terms of, thank you so much, Erin, for summarizing the chat. You saved me. I'm seeing things about SURF criteria and maybe some entry points there, even just generally, but also potentially in countries like Malawi, Ethiopia, and Chad. I'm seeing something about the importance of using data in real time, not only for programmatic decisions, but also feeding into policy and advocacy. So very well noted on that. And I think there's ways we can think about making that more concrete for different commitments. Liashley, I see a comment there for you that just came in. Do you want to speak to that, or would it be better if I read it? Maybe raise your hand if you want to speak, and otherwise I'll just read it out. Awesome. Let me unmute you.
I suppose I just have a question as well as a suggestion, in that I'm not sure that the HRP M&E process requires that we really look at how it involves women and girls in affected communities, and I'm not sure to what extent it's mandated. So I think this, even if there were a few pilot countries who could take that on, I might even go so far as to be radical and push for a feminist approach to M&E, but that might be too far. But I think this is something that could be really practical and at least tried in a few places. So over to you.
Yeah, I love it. And we're at a perfect moment for that with just getting the ball rolling with planning for the HNO HRP. So maybe we can put our heads together on whether we aim for that, you know, in general guidance, or whether it's a few targeted countries or both. I think it's wonderful. Lena is agreeing with you that the feminist approach to M&E is not radical, it's necessary. And Liz is wishing we could like comment. So I guess that's another another agreement with that point. Was there anything else anyone wanted to raise? Anything that, you know, we've missed, that we just haven't thought of, that is worth considering, is super obvious and fell through the cracks of this busy week? Oh, maybe I missed it.
Oh, Rebecca Dennis had a really interesting comment about advocacy and this issue. And I'm wondering if we can call on Rebecca to make that point.
Thanks so much, Joan. And I see her hand up, so let's do that. Rebecca, did that work?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, a lot of the conversations about how data and analysis are feeding into or need to feed into programming in real time. But I would also challenge those of us at the global level as well to also think about how data and analysis can feed into policies that we're pushing for or advocacy that we're doing in real time as well. That can either support or influence what's happening on the ground with programming, or again, to some of the conversations that we've been having around what's in HRPs, what's in country-specific, either donor countries or impacted countries' policies around how they're handling GBV. I think it's just another really important point to not lose sight of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I totally agree. I'm seeing, Fatima, that you said well said to something clear view, but I'm not sure if that's directed at a person or a particular comment, or if you want to come in with one last thought before we hand over to the next. Please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to, and if not, no worries. Okay, here we go. We'll do this. These names really jump around, don't they? Fatima, did that work? Are you unmuted?
Hello?
Yes.
Am I on?
You are, I think. I can hear you.
No, I'm just appreciating the fact, points raised by Yusuf, that Clearview is the name of his organization, in emphasizing the need for us to actually look at the GBVIMS again. Like he has said, a lot of actors on the field, actually they're implementing GBV activities, but are not part of the GBVIMS, but are collecting data anyways. So they need to actually know how to do it, and then have that capacity to be able to do it well. So I was actually agreeing to that. And also importantly, on the point regarding the commitments, I think the commitments were actually framed, though with the participation of civil society, especially in Nigeria, because I am part of those that were involved from the beginning. However, it was UN donor perspective, because the other ones with the civil society have always been, okay, these commitments that we're asked to actually say we would do, where are the funds to actually implement this commitment? Or, you know, so we were asked at a point to indicate if you have funding for it, or if you intend to have funding. That in the beginning, a lot of GBV actors actually thought that by agreeing to some of these commitments, it was a way for them to actually get funding to implement them, not that they actually have funding at that time. So, like he has said, the commitment is in such a way that you can be able to commit to with or without funding, or those that you commit only when you are in partnership with one UN or you know, I don't know. So I was actually really happy that he raised them, and just to also emphasize that this is a really genuine and concrete point. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for emphasizing that, and very well noted that the commitments, many of them that I would say on the data side and the capacity side, really do require financial resources to make them feasible. So thank you for reminding us of that. Caroline, I'm so sorry. I'm getting the private warning that I have to hand over, so we're not going to have time to take.
Christina, I think we can do that one last comment.
We can?
Yes,
oh, wow.
and then we'll move on.
Okay, perfect. I stand corrected. Caroline, let's go over to you. I think you're unmuted. No, it doesn't seem to be working. Can someone else unmute Caroline? I don't know why it's not letting me. Oh,
hi.
Now? Okay, wonderful.
Hi.
Hi.
It's good?
It's good.
Hi, how are you?
Fine,
sorry. I would like to ask you how we can compromise between confidentiality of survivor and our advocating if we want to do like campaign and our difficulties. So we know the media want to do every time excitement for but we in our goals we want to keep the confidentiality for this topic of GBV. So I need to know how we can compromise or do like a balance between our voices and speak.
Thank you so much.
To be very bold to speak and to, at the same time, keep the confidentiality. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that thoughtful comment. And I think it's something that we struggle with a lot, right? The importance on advocacy around this issue, and it being a very tough issue and one that can be quite compelling with sort of stories and the pressure from journalists and things to go in that direction. But they need to always uphold the survivor-centered principles. I don't think I have a ton of time to go into the details of it right now, but I will just take the opportunity to say that the GBV AOR does have a set of media guidelines that might be a good place to start. And also within the GBV minimum standards, there's some specific info on that. So, you know, I'm happy to help make sure you get access to those resources. And if you want to have another conversation about this separately, I'm also happy to do that. I think maybe I'll hand over now back to Joan.
Yep, thank you very much, Christine. And again, thanks to everybody who contributed to that good discussion. We are now going to move on to outcome 4, which is about funding. And as I mentioned the other day, you know, funding actually under the first roadmap, funding didn't have so many commitments or so many strong commitments. So when we were updating the roadmap together as a partnership, you notice that funding resources are included in every outcome area to emphasize the importance of funding those kinds of activities. In addition to which, there is still a standalone outcome on funding that gets at some of the overarching questions, right? And so we're going to go through that outcome again, thinking about what kind of commitments make sense under it. And for this part of the discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Lena from IRC. Thanks, everybody. Lena.
Thanks, Joan. Hi, all. This is my first time sharing my screen while trying to moderate. So if I mess anything up or there are hands raised or anything, please, if any of my co-panelists who have the ability to unmute themselves could let me know, that would be great. So as Joan said, we are looking at outcome 4 on funding, and I thought I would start us off by going through the key themes so far that I have heard from our discussions over the last couple of days, as well as some of the comments on the forum. It has felt to me, since I am doing this session, that all roads lead back to funding. So I'm not sure that I have captured all of the key themes, so please don't hesitate to let me know what I've missed. But I kind of have identified 6. One is that obviously the rhetoric is not matching the level of funding or funding specifically to local organizations. And that we've been reminded a couple of times now during this session that everyone actually has a role to play here, that we can't sit back and let donor states or funders be the only ones who make commitments, that IOs and INGOs act as donors, and that we also have commitments that we can make a little bit lower down on this around the need for prioritizing GBV and in all its forms by leadership, which could potentially be a funding commitment as well, I think. We've also been reminded that there's not going to be one singular commitment or one singular solution to the issue of funding. So we've had conversations about earmarking, whether that's good or bad or both, benchmarking, using reporting requirements as a solution, and what other solutions could we be looking at. And one of those I think really will be tracking, which currently sits as a barrier for us. So in the forum, there's been a limited discussion about one code that everyone could use, and also questions about how we track for both GBV and gender equality, particularly since gender equality is part of this outcome. The final two are that we really need to see more country level demand, not just in statements like the ones that we're making here, but also in actual language from during, program proposals and in the HRPs, and that might be derived from the need for leadership in all its forms to prioritize GBV. So whether that's the Secretary General or leadership, CEOs, presidents of different organizations. I'm just going to do a really quick check if there are any questions, and I don't see any questions in the Q&A. And I will also do a quick pause to see if anyone else has, sorry, I will go back. If anyone else has key themes that they'd like to bring out so far. And I see in the chat that Erin is suggesting that we add challenges related to tracking funding for GBV risk mitigation as well. And thank you for that. I agree that that was part of the tracking barrier. So I don't see anyone with their hand raised. So I'm going to continue on to just a quick overview of the objective 4, which is sufficient funding is provided for GBV and gender equality staffing, interventions, initiatives, and programs during every phase of emergency response. So that's quite holistic and looks hopefully at a number of different areas of funding that we need to review. And I will also point out once again that this is both for GBV and gender equality, which will come up in the questions later. And then around the key action areas, because we are looking to talk about commitments specifically, we have key action areas around prioritization, tracking, localization, advocacy, and the nexus for funding. I encourage you to look at those more specifically in the draft update of the roadmap. But I wanted to move us into a discussion because again, we are trying to talk about commitments here to the new roadmap and see if there are people who are interested or able, oops, I'm not sure what I did there, sorry. Interested and able to talk about model commitments, as well as talking about collective commitments, and if there are specifics that we can get into around what organizations, agencies, states should include in their commitments. So I'm going to look now for if we have any people who want to start the conversation about any of these discussion points, or if anyone has any comments or questions that have been put in the chat. But I also see from April that accountability has come up quite a lot as well. So just opening this up to discussion, and hopefully everyone can still see my discussion points. Italy,
yes. Great,
go ahead.
Hello, I am Marta Collu from the Italian Agency of Development Cooperation. I'm speaking from the point of view of an organization which I think I can honestly say it's not a real gender champion. So I have to be honest, all the deep discussion that you did these days is very useful for us, but we are not able to follow in the detail everything, and we will not be able to commit to every single step. And for an organization like ours, what is really important is to keep up the advocacy to have funding. So, for example, the Oslo conference was very, very important to keep the level of funding for gender-based violence within our humanitarian aid. And also the advocacy you did with the global response plan on COVID was also very important to underline the need to keep gender-based violence as a priority in a moment where it is very easy to divert the funding from other sectors to the health sector. So my point is the funding is very much related to the political part of work, and so if we want to get the rhetoric match action, you also have to keep up the work with advocacy and to give a higher level to the advocacy you do, like having an eminent person or maybe an ambassador that is able to speak with our ministers and push the funding at very, very high level.
Thank you, Marta, for that. I also want to give the floor, if you're interested, to Jennifer Chase, who has a comment about the financial tracking service. Jennifer, did you want the floor? If you do, just raise your hand and then I can see you. Otherwise, I'm also seeing comments in agreement with Italy's comment, and Liz Pender would like to speak. So Liz, you should be unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I think there's, around commitments, again, just reinforcing with folks that the accountability framework has a lot of actions embedded within it that can be reframed and redesigned as commitments, including to this, to achieving this outcome. But I also, in consideration of earlier discussions that we've had about the true need for senior leadership within organizations to commit to GBV, I see an opportunity here for organizations to encourage their own senior leadership, presidents, CEOs, to commit to requesting certain levels of GBV funding within within and throughout the budgets that they submit, multi-sectoral or integrated programming budgets, and that also is a commitment that could be aligned with the policies level outcome, that this could be, theoretically and ideally a policy level change linked to funding, but within an organization.
Thank you, Liz, for that very concrete suggestion. Really appreciate it. I see that Katarina would also like to speak. So Katarina, I think you have the capacity to mute and unmute yourself.
Happy to unmute myself. Just noting that over the past couple of days, a lot of ideas have been coming up around having a pooled fund for local women's rights organizations. So just kind of trying to explore this idea a bit more and have some questions. So I know, for example, there's the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund for local actors. So just wondering, for those who are involved in that, do you find that's not sufficient? Do we need other funds, and if yes, how can it be complementary? Also, thinking back around the time that the Where's the Money report was produced, I remember there was they did look into the question of, like, should the call to action have its own dedicated pooled fund? And for those who were involved in that process, I'm wondering like, what were some of the considerations? Because I think at the end it ended up being with leaning towards a no towards having a call to action pooled funds. So just thinking like how did we end up there? Are people like, are there different thoughts now as well? So it's just more questions for all.
Thanks, Katerina. I'm not going to speak yet to the pooled fund because I think we have some other colleagues who are asking questions, and that feels like taking too much moderator privilege. I don't see any other hands raised right now, but Jennifer, you are unmuted if you wanted to come in.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had just said about the FTS, we just submitted a letter from the Global Protection Cluster signed off by all of the AORs to really push on this issue, because as it's been mentioned quite frequently already, there's a lot of great things that happen and get agreed upon at the global level, but then don't reach the field or reach the field in a sort of ad hoc way or depend on personalities or individuals who are committed to topics. So, we fought very hard leading up to Oslo, and also child protection. It wasn't only the GBV AOR, but to have our own space on the templates. And I think by the statistic that we shared, it indeed was utilized once that space existed. And the same with the FTS, it's only as good as people reporting on it, but there are, it does happen at the country level that the commitment made by OCHA, for example, of having GBV be a priority, or how the FTS functions. Sometimes it's protection coordinators who tell GBV coordinators that they're not meant to be at the table, or that that they should not be filling out the FTS, that it should be them. So I think, looking at how we can make all these things more systematic so that it doesn't depend on individual goodwill and faith, and how I think the comment also that Liz made, we all need to, within our own agencies, and I mean, like I'm speaking to the choir because we all do this, right? I mean, to get our own senior management levels on board, but also to get the field level on board. And I think that's why the 10 workshops that ECHO did were very good, because it was really working at having the ECHO staff at the field level understand what is call to action, why is GBV prioritized. And I think we really need to figure out how to strengthen our connections to our own agencies, going up and going down both directions, as if we don't have enough to do already. But just, I think making some of these global guidances and everything really working now on the implementation side of things.
Thanks, Jen. I also saw a question from Louise asking around that earmarked on Wednesday, earmarked funding was noted to potentially hinder GBV programming, and asking for more information around this. So I'm going to allow people to raise their hands if they want to take that on, or raise your hands if you'd like to respond to any of Katerina's questions, particularly around the question on GBV, a GBV fund. And while people consider raising their hands to talk about earmarking, I'll just say, Katerina, that yeah, I can't answer if people have started to change their minds around a GBV specific fund, call to action fund. I think some of the questions and concerns around that when the Where's the Money report was being developed was around that funding could be diverted from actual GBV programming into the management of a fund. And we were not quite sure that that was the best way to go at this point, or our key informants were not quite sure that that was the best way to go at this point. And that particularly given how the humanitarian system functions and funding comes in and through the humanitarian system, that it may be more management than actual impact. So that was the concern that I remember from that discussion. We only have about 2 minutes left. And I'm just gonna put the request one more time out if anyone has an interest in answering Lisa's question around earmarking. Otherwise, we will be ending this discussion. Sorry, Liz, I can repeat the question. The question was that on Wednesday, it was mentioned that earmarked funding can hinder GBV programming. Does anyone have information around this? And Liz, you are unmuted.
Hi, Elena. Sorry for missing that question before. And I certainly will appeal to Joe and Courtney or Mendy, who might be on with me. I think, just to be clear, I don't know that any one of us was suggesting that we not retain a focus on earmarking in some capacity. I think we just wanted to acknowledge that earmarking is not the only answer, nor should it be seen as the only solution, and that in some cases, when you do have earmarked funding, it can inadvertently inhibit the amount of funding that could be directed to GBV beyond that earmarked amount. And just as an example, if you look at the structure, the approach of US government, we do have GBV funding that is earmarked. PRM, for example, has a earmarked fund specific to the Safe from the Start initiative. OFTA does not have earmarked funding. We take more of a demand-driven, needs-based approach and have found that we are actually able to direct substantively more money towards GBV programming through our non-earmarked funding than through our earmarked. So not to suggest we should, get rid of earmarking altogether, but just acknowledging that there are different dimensions and considerations to it, and that we shouldn't assume that if we have GBV earmarked funding across the board that we have found a solution over.
Thanks, Liz. And thanks for asking the question so that we could be all clear on that. I think that really reflects part of the discussion that we had, which this is not going to be a one solution situation. That funding is a complicated issue. We do have to wrap up this session, and I just want to encourage folks again to go onto the forum and contribute to the discussions happening there. With your follow-up, like Christine's question here about leveraging the humanitarian development nexus, and also to put together some more concrete either collective commitments or model commitments, a la what Liz provided around committing to specific requesting levels, and to keep having this conversation about what earmarks, benchmarks, tracking, etc., can look like from our specific vantage points within the humanitarian system. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joan now, and thanks for your participation all.
Thanks very much, Lena. Thanks for leading us through it. Excuse me, colleagues, we have two more outcomes. One, outcome 4 relates to specialized GBV service, or outcome 5, sorry, relates to specialized GBV services, and then outcome 6 to GBV risk mitigation across areas of work. So we're going to do outcome 5 next, specialized GBV programming and services, and Emily from UNFPA is going to facilitate that discussion for us. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Lena. I'm just trying to share. Hold on one second. Can everyone see? I'm just going to do a super brief presentation. And I think one thing, and I also want to go off of something that Lena said regarding bridging, meaning the global guidance is there. So what are our next steps towards implementation of the guidance? I must say that there were no comments on the forum boards. And if there were some last night, I'm sorry I wasn't able to take a look this morning, but hopefully we can have a good discussion here. Sort of the outline for the discussion, that's common to all of the areas was to look at model commitments, collective commitments, achievements to date, and also the gaps and barriers to implementation. So with that, we'll just look at the minimum standards, or we'll start looking at that because that's really at the core of outcome 5, which reads GBV prevention and response programming, including specialized services that meet the interagency minimum standards on GBV and emergencies, are implemented in every phase of emergency response. As everybody knows, or I hope everybody knows, the minimum standards were launched at the call to action meeting that took place in Geneva in November. And then there was also launches in the field and continued launch globally with the 16 days. So obviously things have been a little bit distracted due to COVID, but we're still working on a number of other supportive pieces to get the minimum standards out there. There will be a facilitator's guide, which will help everyone sort of have an applied understanding of the minimum standards with exercises for each standard that hopefully will come out in the next maybe 2 months. We have a full first draft of that and other pieces, which I won't go into here. So what are the minimum standards? They define what agencies, actors working on GBV programs need to do or achieve to prevent and respond to GBV. What was the need? Why? To enhance accountability and establish clarity on what constitutes a minimum GBV response. And the primary audience for the minimum standards are GBV prevention and response actors, including local women's movements, women-led civil society organizations, and also donors. Within the diagnostic exercises for the minimum standards, donors wanted something to which they could analyze proposals and, and also local organizations and INGOs really wanted something that they could say, this is good practice, and push back against actual requested bad practice from donors. So that was sort of a very reciprocal ask. Just want to also point out that there are other recent, strong standard setting materials, not just the minimum standards that apply to outcome 5. The Women and Girls Safe Space Toolkit provides standards. The Coordination Handbook, of course, is another key resource and also key to Standard 15. Of course, the GBV guidelines, the SPHERE standards, revised CMR guidelines, and also the child protection minimum standards that also were released last year. Something that made the minimum standards a little bit more of a difficult project, but also more effective in the end, as we tried to align the minimum standards with these other standard setting resources as best we could, so that there would be sort of no conflict and that they would reinforce each other. So yes, so this is really at the core. Just want to go into, I'm not going to go into detail because I also couldn't fit it on one slide, the key action areas for outcome 5. There are 8. Of course, the first one is really on implementation of the GBV services and programming. 5.2 speaks to consultation and working in partnership with women and girls and women-led organizations. This is really key because this is also standard 2 of the minimum standards, participation. And it's also integrated through all of the other standards. Standard 2 is a foundational standard and really, underscores why this is so important. Engagement and participation of affected women and girls in the response. Evaluation is 5.3. We will have there are indicators for each standard, and we'll also have a monitoring and evaluation framework that comes out. Accountability, establish and strengthen accountability mechanisms for integration of GBV programming into the HPC. This also speaks to the GBV accountability framework and is in line with that. Localization, in almost every standard we talk about working with local groups and assessment. Resources, dedicate and allocate human and financial resources for safe, quality, and specialized GBV services. Just want to also comment that I've received so many emails since it's come out asking both from folks from NGOs and from INGOs, and then also, even UNFPA staff, saying, oh, can I copy and paste the key actions from this standard or that standard? Is that okay in my proposal? And yes, it's there for you to copy and paste and to adapt. And I see that as making applications for funding much easier and hopefully, better attuned to the standards. So, and, I think it was in last year's call to action meeting, we spoke a lot about the difficulties in preparing great proposals or impressive proposals that appeal to donors. So we hope that the minimum standards is something that really facilitates that and makes that easier. Advocate for funding to implement specialized GBV prevention and response services. And then the system strengthening, which gets at the nexus work, which I think also Christine just made a comment about, which obviously requires usually more of a long-term vision and multi-year funding. So just want to say that there was nothing in the chat, but these are the three questions that are in the forums, but these are the three questions that I posed. I'd like to think that we're in an unprecedented moment where we can say we know what to do and that we can be guided by the recently released minimum standards and other standard setting material, which is the central focus of this outcome. So just want to ask, how can we take advantage of this moment to systematically meet the high standards that we have set? What is needed to take us there? Do we have everything we need, or is there more to take us there? The second question is related to funding and donors. How can donors prioritize programming in line with the minimum standards? How can they better assess proposals, and can they do it through a minimum standards lens? And the third one is related most specifically to commitment making. So which groups are best placed to make what kind of collective commitments in relation to outcome 5, and what could that look like? And are there any ideas for how realization of outcome 5 can be accelerated through collective action? So with that, I will pause and and open it to the floor and open it to comments. Hold on. I can't see the chat if somebody else wants to take a look at that. Okay, great. I see Erin put in a comment, would love to add a discussion point if there's time on the need to build additional specialized HR capacity as well. And I'm glad that Liz likes the idea of looking at proposals through a minimum standards lens. And again, to train or socialize the minimum standards with field donors. Liz, do you want to say anything about that? Because I think I had talked to Kate very briefly about that, about just having a discussion with the donor group about what that would look like, or if anything else was needed. So if any of the donors have an idea that, would love to have feedback, that would be great. I think you're unmuted.
Hi, Emily. So again, I think this goes to the different funding modalities, but I do know that some of the donor states have funding decisions that are made at the field level by generalists, and not necessarily at the global level by gender equality or GBV experts. And, you know, BHA, US government, is one of those. And it occurs to me that if some of my field-based colleagues who are more generalists are more familiar with and conversant on the minimum standards, then they would be more inclined to look for and solicit and support proposals that are submitted that are more service-based, that meet these standards. And I think then we would avoid projects that are, you know, overly focused on awareness raising or don't necessarily meet certain ethical standards, and then they themselves would subsequently know what questions to ask when they do happen to meet with country directors of programs who might themselves forget to, you know, raise GBV as a priority. So just seeing a link between that suggestion and this outcome, and again, the funding outcome.
Yep, great. Yeah, we'd love to have more, maybe a more detailed conversation with the donor group on this. So thanks for bringing that up. Just want to go to something that Christine and Erin are posting regarding human resources. Standard 3 is on staff care and support. And in it are the core competencies for GBV program managers. And obviously that, you know, addresses training, addresses the profiles, addresses, you know, of course, local knowledge, as well as a real value to good services and programming. So if anyone wants to, you know, take that away, hold on, I'm trying to unmute some people. And speak more about that. Go ahead. About what more is needed on human resources and training staff to get us there. Is it more a question of us as GBV specialists working with our human resources staff to apply those core competencies in the screening and the human resources processes, or is it something more than that?
Emily, can I come in?
Is that Erin?
It's Christine.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Sorry, I was trying to raise my hand and getting confused.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
No, it didn't go up. That's why. Manage. Yeah, I think it's partially that. I think it's working with our human resources colleagues to help them understand, you know, what actually needs to be in an application in order to make it through to a shortlist. But also maybe just looking at some of the processes that lead up to that final selection and seeing, you know, if there are any other bottlenecks or, you know, problems coming up that we can address in our systems. So that was kind of the main comment from my side.
Great, thanks. I know it might have even been, and I'm not saying this with 100% confidence, but I think it might have been in UNFPA's commitments to make the core competencies, you know, part of all GBV and gender job postings. We did work with HR on that, but I would love to sort of agree and agree to sort of looking more closely at, you know, to what extent that was done and what the impact was. But yeah, it's also a question not just of having it there, but just to really sort of understand these profiles. Anyone else? I like the ideas on the minimum standards lens for donors. Anything else to bridge or to sort of get us from this moment where, you know, we know what to do to implementing? Italy? I don't see any.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the gaps. I think, again, here we have a gap of belief, of knowledge about these general guidelines on minimum standards. It's sad to say, I have to say, but when I think about most of humanitarian officers working in the field and drafting projects, probably they don't have a deep knowledge of the GBV guidelines. So we should really insist a lot more on capacity building and development of human resources if we want to improve the quality of our programs and to really have projects that really apply to the standards.
Thank you, Marta. So that's advocacy and awareness raising around the resources that are out there, not only the minimum standards, but the other sort of main resources that guide decision-making on GBV services. Liz, was that your hand from before, or do you have an addition?
Emily, I think Caroline again has her hand raised from Lebanon.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Caroline.
Thank you. My point of view about the collective action, according to my experience, we need to stop competition and rivalry between us as a local organization. Also, some organizations are monopolizing most of the financial, so they are overfunded. And some other organizations who work a lot on the field and they are in contact with poor women and suffered women, they don't have underfunding. This policy hinders the possibility of collective action. So there a big uneven situation between local and the policy of international organization. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? I mean, we can wind up early as we might be over time. Jennifer writes, how do we get senior level to promote our resources and advocate for GBV to others at their level rather than just the technical level, always trying to do this? We know that executive directors pay attention to other EDs. I do think that's, a good point, that, we learn from our peers and we listen to our peers the most, including executive directors. Liz, do you have another question for the group?
No question.
Okay.
Sorry, I think I'll unraise my hand. It's inadvertent.
It's okay. It's tough to monitor and speak. Christine Apio says, there are settings where job requirements disadvantage women from applying because they don't meet the criteria. Flexibility in HR is critical. I totally agree. This is something that is addressed in the HR standards. There's a paragraph on valuing local knowledge and also the knowledge of local women and girls' voices, and specifically regarding HR policies. And it encourages some flexibility as well. But I see your point also about some male candidates. So that's a really good point.
So I think we may need to wind this up if If there aren't any more hands raised. Emily, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Just wanted to maybe just read out Fiona's comment about collective action around cross-stakeholder and field-focused familiarization on the standards, which is a good one to end on.
It is indeed. And we may bring it up again when we get to working group cross collaboration, right?
Agree.
It's also, thank you very, very much, Emily, also for all the work that you and others did on the minimum standards. I mean, under the first roadmap, development of those minimum standards was an action. And it's really exciting to think that under the second roadmap, what we're really talking about is taking those things and making them real. So super exciting. Colleagues, I am very mindful that we are pushing past the break. I know that, but I think it's really important to finish up on the roadmap to try to get this whole piece done so we've done it comprehensively. So what we'll do is we'll go to outcome 6 and Aaron Patrick. We'll probably shorten the break a little bit, but we'll equally shorten the last session because we want to be respectful of the time, you know, winding up more or less on time as well. So let me go quickly to Aaron Patrick, then we'll do a break, then we'll do a short final session. So Aaron, GBV risk mitigation.
Thanks, Joan. And I won't take it personally that you said something that sounded like Aaron Patrick is pushing you to go past the break.
No, nothing of the sort.
Hi, everyone. I know when I was talking yesterday, I guess somehow you couldn't see the presentation. So I just want to check because all I see right now is my PowerPoint. I can't see my video. So do you see a giant version of my face or do you actually see the presentation? Great. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go as quickly as possible. If I can get this to move forward. There we go. Really what I'm hoping that it'll be good, that my presentation is really mostly discussion questions. So I'm just going to remind you about outcome 6. I'm not going to go through the KAAs. You can all read them. But the outcome that's focused on risk mitigation talks about risk mitigation and promotion of gender equality being integrated into really all aspects of the program cycle and across all humanitarian sectors in line with the guidelines. And I put that across all humanitarian sectors in italics because that's really, you know, the key focus. It's not the sole focus, but it's the key focus of the risk mitigation work that we lead through the GBV guidelines team. So we're really looking at how are we integrating GBV risk identification and mitigation in other sectors' work. And this is a bit of a challenge, and it's one of the questions that I will have in the next slide on discussion about how we do that when a lot of our target audience are actually not. How do we push for commitments and support the implementation of those commitments when a lot of our target audience is actually not members of Call to Action. But I also just wanted to flag for you the indicators that we have for this outcome that are part of the roadmap. And so one is looking at the percentage of total cluster or sector plans that include GBV risk mitigation within their own objectives. This is a very aspirational indicator. You know, obviously we'd love to see 100%. We know that that's, you know, very unlikely, at least in the short term. But we would love to see over the course of this new roadmap an increase, ideally a significant increase in that. And then a second indicator is related to the number of call to action partners that report integrating GBV risk mitigation into their work. And that's directly stemming from a problem that we had with reporting in the last, under the last roadmap. So just really quickly, some of the challenges, we also didn't have very many comments in the chat, although shout out to Lena and Joan for chiming in. But I'm just going to summarize a few of the challenges that we had with risk mitigation over the last roadmap, which was that I believe that we actually, outcome 6 had the fewest number of commitments made under the last roadmap. And related to that, the achievements that were made by the sector, by call to action partners as a whole, over the course of the last 5 years weren't effectively captured. So not only were there not a lot of commitments made, but the work that was done, we know that there was a lot of work done, and a lot of it wasn't actually able to be captured in the reports the way that some other outcome areas achievements were. And that was largely because of the way the text was worded. So it was really heavily focused on the development of tools and standards and policies related to risk mitigation as opposed to actually doing the work. And so I think a lot of partners, you know, either already had tools in place or weren't really focused on developing tools and policies, but were focused more on actually implementing risk mitigation actions, but didn't feel that they could report on that because that wasn't the way that the language was framed. So it's much clearer now, thanks to Joan and Hen in Canada for making sure that that language is tighter now. So I'm really hopeful that with that clearer language, it'll be a bit easier for partners to make commitments and report on those commitments. But we do still have some challenges. One that I just mentioned, which is ensuring that everybody that has a role to play in risk mitigation, which realistically is the whole humanitarian system, can see themselves within outcome 6. And how specifically can we push for that when we're talking about actors that may not be members of call to action, or parts of agencies that may be members of call to action, but the people, the staff that would be tasked with really developing or implementing those commitments are not the people that are sitting in on these meetings and that are familiar with the processes and understand the commitment making process, etc. And then there's also a challenge related to developing clear and measurable commitments. I know this isn't unique to risk mitigation, but because we're specifically talking here about agencies and staff that are not, you know, GBV specialized, or this may not be their you know, primary area of focus, I think a lot of times we have people or agencies think that they somehow need to do it all. And the way that the language in the call to action is, they may think, oh gosh, you know, I need to integrate GBV risk identification and mitigation and promote gender equality, you know, and I'm just a WASH engineer. How can I do all of that? So how can we kind of translate the language to people to make sure that they're doing what they need to do and they're doing it appropriately and as much as they can, but without kind of putting them off, so to speak, by making them think suddenly they need to like be working on social norms change and that kind of thing. I'm going to pause there for a second before I get into my list of discussion questions, but I just wanted to see if there's any other specific challenges related to risk mitigation. I mean, I know there's lots, but are there any big ones that you think I've missed in this list? Funding. Julie, do you want to expand on that? If somebody else can unmute her, because I don't have the list of participants up anymore. Oh wait, yes I do. Julie, do you want to speak?
Am I unmuted or am I muted?
Nope, you're unmuted.
Oh, okay. Just the obvious one is that what I have found very difficult is to get, because I mean, to talk about, like, let's just use the guidelines, for example, if you want to roll that out within an organization the size of Oxfam, for example, you're going to need to do some training, some basic training. So where's the, I can't find the funding necessarily to be able to do that as thoroughly as I would like, for example. So, and then it's difficult also, this links back to so many other conversations we've had in the last couple of days, because it also links back to how do we even track it? So the question in the last report, partner report, around how much funding do you direct to GBV. So for us, we don't do GBV implementation, so it will be largely GBV risk mitigation. I can't track the funding for that in terms of our own internal systems and how that works. So there's a number of different points, I think, around funding. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, Julie, thanks.
Okay, I don't know how to remute myself.
Yeah, you're already remuted. Not by me. Great, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I totally agree with your points. Anything else on this? I mean, we've got hopefully a bit of time for discussion on more details, but I just want to see if there's any other like kind of pieces of the work that we need to flag here. All right, then I'm gonna move on to my discussion questions. So I was gonna put them up one at a time, but I'm gonna do them all at once just in the interest of time here. So they start broad and they move a little bit more specific, but I just wanted to ask, you know, we have such a great group of people on the line with all sorts of different varying experiences. It would be really great to learn from you what sorts of actions or messages or methodologies or whatever have helped you to move internal conversations on risk mitigation over the last roadmap period, so roughly over the last 5 years, if anything. And I suppose a side piece to that would be, if you've tried and not succeeded, what do you think are some of the barriers? So that's one question. And another one is looking at what sort of key messages or methodologies have resonated with your senior management and sectoral leadership. So if you feel like, you have made progress on risk mitigation internally, whether it's, with your ED or president level, whether it's, if you're an agency that works in particular sectors or leads clusters or whatever, what has resonated, because we would love to learn from that to be able to, to support other agencies. And then getting a little bit more specific, looking at how we expand our audience. So, we have call to action member agencies that do work across multiple sectors. So like, Julie was just saying, Oxfam doesn't have, dedicated GBV specific standalone programming, but yet, is a member of call to action. But Julie, I'm sorry to use you as the example, Julie is the gender advisor and a GBV specialist, and she's the one from Oxfam that sits on the call to action. And in a perfect world, that wouldn't always be the case, right? Or it wouldn't only be the case that it would be the GBV or gender specialist of a multi-sectoral agency that is the only person participating in call to action. So how do we push that? How do we get agencies with these multi-sectoral roles to be engaged on different levels? And then a point that Lena had made in the forum was, how do we get GBV risk mitigation or responsibilities related to that reflected in, for example, the job descriptions of staff across other sectors, and institutionalizing that. So again, it doesn't all just fall on the GBV specialist. And then also looking at HQ versus field level. If you've been following the chat, I keep raising, for example, some challenges that we've seen with donors at the global level, really supporting and committing to GBV generally, to GBV risk mitigation specifically at HQ, but finding that at field level, when proposals are submitted, risk mitigation activities in other sectors are still being systematically stripped out by donor agencies. So how can we push for that? Push to change that, but also, difference in capacities or commitments on risk mitigation generally in our own agencies at HQ versus field level as well. And then lastly, and we're only going to have like 10 minutes to discuss all of these, but how can we use the commitment making process under the new roadmap to reflect on and hold ourselves collectively accountable for ensuring safer programming across clusters and sectors? So could we make collective commitments that push us as a sector to do better on risk mitigation, and what might those commitments look like? And then we've talked about a couple different potential options for doing that. One is to, for example, work with the clusters or support the clusters to make motto commitments that their own cluster member agencies would then use as a kind of a draft or a model for making their own commitments specifically to risk mitigation. So, for example, if the Global WASH cluster said, these are 3 sample commitments or motto commitments on GBV risk mitigation in WASH that, an Oxfam or a CARE or some other call to action member agency that does WASH programming could potentially adapt. Is that one model? And then another idea that I also keep raising like a broken record is whether or not we could consider approaching the global clusters to see if they would become potentially distinct members of call to action, so distinct from the membership of their lead agency, or in addition to, so we would have, for example, UNICEF, UNICEF's GBV team, Christine sits on call to action as the member, but could we have, the WASH cluster or the education cluster also sit on call to action? I know that there's challenges related to that, but it's something I wanted to pose for discussion as a way maybe to push sectors to engage more on GBV risk mitigation. All right, so I'm going to pause there. I see there's been a ton in the chat. I haven't been reading it while I was talking. But does anybody, I want to leave my screen up because I know it's a lot of questions. questions. So let me just see, does anybody want to speak while I read through the chat briefly? I don't see any hands up. Okay, I'm being told we have 7 minutes. Yeah, I had a feeling this was going to happen. Everybody is too tired.
I can come in. It's Christine.
Thanks.
I was trying to hold off because I've been talking a lot today and I still can't raise my hand somehow. So sorry about that. I just put in the chat that I think also something for us to think about, and you know, you and I talk about this all the time, that as we're thinking about commitments for other sectors related to risk mitigation, that often in terms of meaningful implementation and progress for true institutionalization of these concepts within a sector, we see kind of our jargon around risk mitigation almost disappearing because they start to own it in their own language and they start to deliver it, you know, really within their own structures and their own systems. And so, you know, like we saw in the last roadmap, that creates challenges for tracking, right, in a systematic way, in an organized way. And Julie, please come in if you'd like to, but I'll just flag that Julie also mentioned that there are some issues around funding linked to that too, right? So if we're trying to track, not only track the funding and track the resources and track what's happening in these sectors, only by looking for keywords like GBV or risk mitigation, we're going to be missing a lot, but that it potentially has implications for raising money that we can dedicate to these efforts as well. So that's just a reflection.
Yeah, I totally agree, Christine. Great point. So potentially some donor education there as well, right? And I would say, you know, this HQ versus field level issue, you know, in both places, but probably especially even at field level. And I think maybe also some, you know, there's a piece of that resonates with HCs and HCTs as well.
Erin, it's Joan. Can I say something?
Please.
Sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand. I don't know that we have an answer today, but I think coming back to that question about whether there's a way of working with the agencies that lead the other clusters and the cluster leads to see if there is some way that they become members of Call to Action, or they as a cluster can still, via their cluster lead agencies, make some of their own cluster commitments to the roadmap, I think would be really great in terms of ownership and language that they use with their colleagues, et cetera. And I think it would be great within the Call to Action to see if we can try to move that forward and then marry that kind of ongoing collaboration. I know that you guys have already started through the guidelines reference group, but see if through the accountability framework implementation, through our field implementation, we can sort of model that closer collaboration at the globe level with continuing to build that at the field level.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Joan. I see Julie has her hand up. Julie, you are unmuted.
Yeah, hi everyone again. I'm not sure that this thought is going to be properly articulated, but I've been trying to figure out how to raise it. But it relates to the nexus and how if we don't have certain, if we don't have certain things, certain foundations in place before a crisis hits, around the capacity on gender equality, the capacity of colleagues to understand the foundations of gender-based violence, it really hinders our work in emergencies when we're trying to catch up to do the work and to try to explain to colleagues why this is important. So yeah, I don't know I don't know how all that fits in, but I keep going back to it. I keep going back to it these last few days, but also almost on a daily basis, and particularly with COVID, as I've seen that some of the work that we had started on, that we were doing on building the capacity of colleagues at country level, building the capacity is a terrible term, and I'm sorry that I'm using that. increasing their capacity to understand what a gender and emergency response might be, and maybe is a better way to explain that, is really blocking, because some of the funding that we were using to do that was then shifted over to providing PPE, for example. So it's like a game of Tetris. If you don't have those blocks, everything kind of falls, or I don't know, a pyramid. I don't know which example, what analogy you want to use, but I think that the connection to those foundational pieces is really important for risk mitigation, I guess was what I'm really trying to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, Julie. And we've definitely seen that with COVID. We've seen that with a lot of recent natural disasters as well. When we get, like, from the GBV guidelines team, for example, we get urgent requests for, trainings on GBV risk mitigation, but it's after an emergency has already hit. And then the idea of, somehow going in to do a training, nobody has time. And they're like, well, maybe we can find a half an hour. and yeah, I mean, the idea of trying to, support teams to develop comprehensive responses in such a short time is pretty impossible. So yeah, I agree that emergency preparedness is a key piece of it. It's something we've been working on as a team. We do have an emergency preparedness training package in place that we've delivered once in Asia Pacific. Yeah, and one-off training doesn't get us very far. Agreed. All right, Christine Apio has her hand up. Let's see, oh, there we go, sorry. Can somebody else unmute Christine? It's not working for me.
Hello?
Yep, there we go, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin. One of the things that probably relates more to coordination on GBV risk mitigation, but also with the different initiatives that was discussed before, is that oftentimes in the field I've come across many questions from cluster coordinators, saying, asking why someone working on GBV risk mitigation have to go to them separate from gender equality and then the PSEA, and the fact that gets them actually confused. And they ask questions as to why all these initiatives, cannot actually engage them together so that, they're able to get the nitty-gritty of these different initiatives. So I think in terms of the field operationalization of the risk mitigation, it would really be important to strengthen that coordination between actors working on the gender thematic group, PSEA, and any other mainstreaming that might be happening, including protection, and really ensure joint engagement with cluster coordinators at the field, acknowledging they have limited time as well, but I think that also provides opportunity to clarify some of the areas that might be confusing to them. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Christine. Thanks very much. I am being told I have to wrap up, so I'm sorry that I gave you a whole bunch of questions when you're all super tired, but it would be great if you do have thoughts that you haven't been able to share, if you could maybe put them in the forum, because I would really love to get your inputs on the questions that I raised or any others that you have, so thank you.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, Erin, I think if we can get some of the additional conversation around those questions, it will be super helpful on the commitment forming side of things too. Okay, so look, everybody, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a short break, reconvene at like roughly nine-minute break, reconvene at 10:35. We'll shorten the working group period and have our closing remarks to make sure we don't go too far past 11, mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So let's reconvene 10:35 and we'll power through. Thank you very much.
The meeting will resume in 1 minute, so grateful if you could start making your way back to your computer screens.
Okay, it looks like we can get going. And thanks so much. We've got still a good group of participants hanging in, so big thanks for that. Before we go into the working group highlights, we have obviously just powered through really the new outcomes, or rather the outcomes of the updated roadmap. So what we're going to take a second to do first in this next piece is Katerina is going to say something about what the process is for reaffirming our support for that roadmap, for making updating, making new commitments under the roadmap. So Katerina, can I turn it over to you, and then we'll move into the working groups.
Of course. So first of all, I'm very pleased that after the last round of review, we do not have any outstanding red lines on the roadmap. So we are now ready to move into the reaffirmation process. So next week, all partners are going to receive an email with the reaffirmation instructions, guidance, and a letter and a commitment making template. So as part of the reaffirmation, in your letter, you're going to be reaffirming and endorsing the goal of the call to action, the 3 objectives, and the core principles. You will also be expected to make a minimum of 2 commitments, and the commitments template will provide some best practices around making those commitments. In terms of timelines, if you're ready to make your commitment, like if you already know what your commitments are, feel free to make them, and you can send them back to Canada as early as next week. But you can also take some time to think through and strategize and really start working. Hopefully this meeting enabled you to start thinking of possible collective commitments you can make. So please work with partners on those collective commitments over the next few weeks. So the big opportunity, I guess, to announce your commitments will be in September around the roadmap launch. So I really encourage all partners to reaffirm around September. But the process will be open until the end of this year. So the roadmap is starting 2021 to 2025. That's the time frame of the roadmap. So all partners will have until December 31st of this year to make your commitments. So further guidance will be, like more detailed guidance will be shared with the in the email. So keep an eye out for that, and looking forward to seeing all of your new commitments. Thank you.
Thanks, Katerina. And if you look at your agenda, you see that the last piece we're going to do is hear from our working group co-chairs, some reflections on the priorities for their working group, and also ideas they have for pieces of work that we could take up across the working groups. And so I'm going to ask each of the working group co-chair, or the working groups, to take not more than about 10 minutes just to share some of those kinds of reflections, and then we'll do a closing. And just to reassure everybody time-wise, we'll certainly totally be done, I think we can say, by 11:15 latest, and maybe a little bit earlier. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. So that means we'll start with the International Organizations Working Group. The co-chairs are Christine from UNICEF and Emily from UNFPA. So turn it over to you all for reflections on priorities and areas for cross-working group collaboration. Thanks both.
Thank you. Just want to say, I'll start it off and then Christine will fill in any gaps as I'm newer to the leadership than she is. But just want to say that we tried this year to sort of have a more streamlined work plan than previous years. And also, of course, that some of that has been a little bit derailed since COVID, of course. But I'll just sort of do a readout of some of the sort of bigger pieces that we're focusing on. And then just also sort of zero in on some of the things that, you know, have been highlighted for perhaps some cross-working group collaboration. So in no particular order, we wanted to, probably the biggest piece would be to compile initiatives, good practices, and lessons learned on how international organizations are overcoming barriers to partnering with local women's organizations and women leaders. Clearly, this is something that has come out very strongly in our discussions thus far. And so we want to look at, you know, some of the research on where we are with this, what has improved over the years, and what more can be done. We did have a dedicated call on this, specifically related to COVID. And for those who haven't listened to it, there was a UN Women, the Trust Fund on Ending Violence Against Women that focuses a lot about local groups and their work with COVID, which is also, you know, some good food for thought on this. But originally it was just more of a general focus on this work, not COVID related. But of course we've brought in that lens. We wanted to create some mechanism for how the IO members, and I think this goes, you know, probably for all of the groups as well, can support each other with developing commitments against the new roadmap. We haven't developed too much thought about that because we wanted to wait until the roadmap was finished, but wanted to really sort of support each other and sort of be a sounding board. Perhaps we can, you know, present to each other in some ways, and also wanted this to be a way to sort of create, you know, a platform for collaboration and what can be sort of dual commitments as well. We also focused on, this is just sort of a low-hanging fruit, perhaps an onboarding process for new working group focal points, a process and maybe just a short briefing note. Something else that's come out in discussions thus far is, you know, a bit of advocacy, but create a set of top line messages on the role and the added value of call to action. And this is for internal dissemination and sensitization, both within our organizations and perhaps with other working groups. We were thinking maybe it could be sort of an informal document that could be, you know, updated, you know, here and there. We also, of course, want to continue advocacy regarding key moments. And then also, we had the success last year of the Do No Harm approach guidance note. I guess that started in the IO working group, that there was an identified need for it among all of the groups. And that was endorsed by all. So we're all, of course, open to working on something else that's similar. And then something that, you know, we really want to talk about more within our group was identifying high-level missions, such as an SRSG on sexual violence mission, or specifically an EDG mission, where we can really promote the use of the call to action roadmap and also the GBV accountability framework. Obviously, those missions are on hold right now, but that is something that we want to revisit. So those are the main pieces of ongoing pieces of our roadmap, and also some pieces that I think speak to cross-working group collaboration. Christine, please come in if I did not say everything that is our primary focus right now.
No, you did an amazing job as always, and thanks for the heavy lifting at the last minute. I think maybe just reflections on kind of where we are and key moments or key opportunities now. with that top line messaging, as Emily said, we thought there could be some interesting opportunities for collaborating on that cross-working group. Also for the model commitments, you know, we've been talking a lot, and this came up in the last session about, you know, targeting other sectors and what those commitments would look like. And I think a lot of the cluster lead agencies sit in the IO working group, but a lot of the partners who would make commitments under these sit in other working groups. So making sure we link that up. And then also I think, you know, that the note that we managed to finish at the beginning of the year, the one about do no harm for high level missions, obviously no travel right now, but I would imagine once travel opens up that there's going to be a lot of attention on GBV for the high level missions, just given the profile of the issue. So it could be an opportunity to really get that out in a meaningful way as a collective. Over.
Thank you both. That's great. Those were some very concrete suggestions, both internally what you're going to be doing, and then I love the idea of that collaboration around commitments, both within and across, including the other clusters, the other areas of work. Next, we will go to the NGO co-chairs, Milka from CARE and Gary from Abad.
Hello, everyone. This is Gary from Abad. I will be sharing my screen. Okay. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the NGO working group has been meeting regularly, and today's discussion will focus mostly on our work plan and some of the activities that we've decided to focus on, as well as their status. We as the NGO working group have decided to focus on 3 specific buckets. One of them is local engagement and leadership. The second is advocacy, and the third is accountability and learning. And we are very much interested in focusing on cross-working group collaborations, discussions, and initiatives. Moving towards the first bucket, here we have the local engagement and leadership. We have 2 major actions that we are interested in focusing on for the remainder of this year. One of them is to develop a strategy and vision for local NGO engagement, and this has been also highlighted in the roadmap and wanting to engage more with women-led and supported organizations. So this is what we are intending to do. Reaching out to potential local partners to identify how they could be integrated and part of the call to action. Our second action under the same bucket is to focus on rolling out the field implementation strategy, which was discussed in yesterday's session. And we are very much interested in trying to implement at least 1 or 2 collective activities under this strategy. Moving towards the third bucket, we have advocacy. We have 3 actions. The first one is developing advocacy priorities and messages for the new call to action lead for 2021. And the second one is trying to be more diverse and having more different organizations, including local organizations, attending various call to action events, such as today's annual partners meeting. And the third one is developing joint strategies for cross working group collaborations and discussions. So this is the area where we see that we can have the most cross working group discussions and bilateral meetings. And lastly, it's the accountability and learning. And this is where we see we can have really strong commitments from different organizations who are part of the call to action to work on the new roadmap. And lastly, it's to also create a sense of awareness and socialization among the call to action partners and members. These are our 3 major buckets and their activities. Yes, there have been delays in their implementation due to COVID-19. However, we are committed to making sure that we have a go at them within the next few months. Milka, if there's anything you'd like to add, please feel free.
Nope, that's great. Thanks. Thanks, Gary.
Whoops. Great. I'm not looking at the chat. That was great, Gary. Thank you very much. And I guess I was thinking as I was looking at those great slides too, that just a reminder that we'll want to share our work plans across working groups too, if we go ahead and perhaps amend them a bit based on the outcome of this annual meeting. So thank you so very much. And then we will move to the states and donors group. So that's Barbara from Switzerland and Kate from the UK.
Hi, Joan, and thanks very much. Hi, everyone. So just very quickly, a number of factors have meant that our work plan has been a bit on pause. As a working group, we've been very much focused on the call to action processes and working towards the sign-off of a new roadmap. And so this has meant that our quarterly meetings have been taken up with discussing and agreeing on various call to action process issues. Also, once we successfully mapped all the sort of key events that we wanted to engage on for 2020, and our focus was for the work plan for 2020 was very much on advocacy. COVID-19 has meant that our plans to engage and coordinate advocacy and meet around the international conferences has been somewhat hampered. But positively, we have delivered on two important areas in 2020. The first is coordination around advocacy to OCHA on the specific objective on GBV and the GHRP. And we discussed as a working group recently that this is the first time really that almost all donors have spoken up in support of a common issue. And it felt like a really positive development in how we use the working group. And then secondly, we worked with the GBV AOR to organise donor calls on COVID-19 with the Rigas. And then Switzerland and UK have also participated on GBV AOR calls on resource mobilisation for COVID-19. So there's been some good coordination there as well. We've also had some great opportunities to share best practice, such as a recent presentation from ECHO on their protection mainstreaming indicator. And I know that sharing experience and expertise among ourselves as donors is really valued by the working group, and we're keen to do that more in 2020 onwards. So in terms of what we will focus on for the rest of the year, we're going to be, as I said, using the forum for exchanges on ways of working and sharing best practice, but we're also very keen to focus on joint advocacy and statements, particularly focused at an agency level, and developing key messages for strategic discussions with IOs. We'll also look at sort of better coordination on funding and more discussions around funding modalities. And in terms of collaborating with the other working groups, I think we're very much keen to work in collaboration with IO and NGO working groups, and specifically on strategic advocacy for key engagement opportunities such as the Beijing +25 and the Action Coalitions, but also to develop advocacy priorities and messages for the incoming call to action lead for 2021. Barbara, is there anything that you would like to add?
Thank you very much, Kate. I think that was great. I think there is one more point where we are also interested in possibly cross working group discussions, and this is the overcoming the challenges to funding and partnering with women's organizations and local organizations. Over to you, Joan.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara, and Kate too. That was very well done. Thank you all. I think we do have a few minutes. I'm going to ask my colleagues in my Canadian colleagues to help here. But if anybody has any questions, not so much comments, because I think we can capture that in the chat and make sure we feed it back. But if anybody has any questions of the co-chairs or of Katerina about her comment on next steps for the roadmap, we do have a couple minutes where we could address those. So if you would raise your hand, and I'll ask for Olivia and Katerina to let us know who's got a question, if there are any. Otherwise, we can just continue on.
Joan, I'm not able to raise my hand. This is Milka.
Hi, Milka.
But we did have a poll question. I don't know whether we have the time to do it, but the poll question might, I see Erin's comment in the chat about like the commitment making process and how we can make this process more collective and all of that. So there are a couple of areas that the working groups, as you've heard, have identified as potential areas of cross-working group collaboration. And we were wondering whether, could you all vote and give us a sense of whether these are the areas that make sense. I see the poll is up, thank you. And then maybe we can figure out how to move them forward.
Great. So we'll end with this exercise here. Can you vote for multiple things? Can you say, these are my top 3?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. So what I would suggest is that people vote for the one that they think is the most important, and let's see which come to the top. Yeah. Okay, so that's great. I think we see the results there. There seems to be a lot of support for some kind of collaborative effort around this theme about supporting what can we better do to support local women's groups, fund local women's groups, engage the local women's groups more in the work that we're doing. And then followed by this, doing some kind of learning or peer support. We'd have to think about what that looks like around the commitment making process. I think it's Christine or Erin's point in the comment box, in the chat box, about could we find ways of connecting around this process. And of course, there's also interest in this suggestion, I think, particularly from the IO working group around developing top line messages around the role and value of call to action. So that's great. And what wasn't included here, but is an obvious other area of collaboration is the advocacy work. So, advocacy has been something that I think we've been trying to do more of over the last couple of years. And I think, we've had some good examples or situations where we've been able to come together to do advocacy around specific moments or opportunities. And I think maybe the question for us will be, how can we be a little bit more systematic and forward-looking and proactive around that?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Milka, for launching that. And it's great to see, it's great to see the results, and also interesting to think about where we can get help for different things. I'm thinking, for example, about the top line messages. I think we have some colleagues that we know are interested in that, so we'll be able to move some of that along. And then just thinking about how learning around the commitment making process is one kind of thing. And of course, it also relates to stronger engagement and support for local women's organizations because of the desire, we hope, for really strong and good commitments under localization and the updated roadmap. So I can see those two things working well together too. So thank you very much. That seems like a kind of energetic place to stop, I think, if that makes sense to everyone. If someone more adept than me, hopefully, nope, I think we're good. All right. My job, I think, now is to turn it over to Gillian Gillen from the Government of Canada, who is going to make closing remarks. Before I do that, I just want to, for myself and my colleagues, thank you all for your engagement over these 3 days, and what a privilege it is to work with everybody. And I think I'm probably speaking for the group when I also want to say a big thanks to Canada, not only for organizing this meeting and pulling it off under really quite challenging circumstances, but also really for the leadership that you all have given to the call to action over this last year and a half. And we look forward to a great, what do we have, 6 months of still under your leadership, and especially exciting to think about the launch of the new roadmap. But with a thanks from all of us, I'll turn it over to you, Gillian.
Thanks for that, Joan. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, great. So like you, I want to thank everybody for all the active participation over the past 3 days, and of course, all year round. I think it's quite fitting and inspiring that we've had a day, or 3 days, but particularly a day of discussing our commitments to addressing all forms of gender-based violence in emergencies on today, which is the day for ending sexual violence in conflict.
We were excited about hosting you here in Canada, in Ottawa, as it's our last annual partners meeting as the global lead, but of course, that wasn't possible. We're sorry we weren't able to meet in person, but I think that this was the best substitute we could hope for in the circumstances. And so I want to thank you all for your patience when we've had some technical glitches over the days, and your willingness and ability to adapt and make the most of this format through chat and engaging throughout the 3 days. I think one of the advantages we've had with this forum is that it's been much more accessible. And so I think we've really benefited from the excellent participation of people from all over, and particularly colleagues from local organizations that might not have been able to join us in person. We've had 38 local organizations participate, which I think is great. I want to thank everyone for being so engaged and sharing your ideas and expertise as speakers, participants in the chat, and as our facilitators. This is certainly, for me, the most dynamic experience I think I've had on a webinar or Zoom since COVID-19 started and we moved to this way of working. So thank you for making it a success. We now have our 2021 to 2025 roadmap. And I think this meeting has been really useful in helping us plan how we can best achieve the outcomes that we are all committing to. We've had such a rich discussion, and it's a challenge for me to try to wrap up and highlight some of those points, but I'll give it a whirl to kind of capture some of the things. And I think just the last session reinforced a number of points. And of course, our final report will be best able to do that. So I think we've acknowledged some of the challenges and successes that we've had as a group in advancing GBV and the GHRP and our advocacy work, and agreement that more needs to be done to achieve a standalone objective. And then we need to continue our efforts for the next iteration of the GHRP, and putting pressure on the system to disrupt really the way humanitarian system is addressing this issue. We had a discussion of the roadmap launch in September, where there was a great bold idea of looking at what we could do with a full day event to profile our work and have sufficient space to discuss it. I think we'll have some opportunities to discuss that further and think creatively about what we can do to achieve that, recognizing again the limitations we'll likely face with COVID-19 reality. I think a further idea we had though to push forward is to maybe have some of our heads of organizations share the updated roadmap and the GBV accountability framework with staff at missions, regional and local offices to demonstrate the importance and value of our collective commitment. We heard that this is a key moment for us to seize opportunities to collaborate across global and field levels to discuss our commitments, that was just echoed moments ago, and to really look for opportunities to collaborate. In support of this, there was the suggestion also just mentioned that we can look to develop maybe some more advocacy tools or products, guides to help communicate and reach out to engage other partners, even within our own offices perhaps, explaining who we are and what we do. We heard the call for better tracking of gender-based violence funding through FDS, OECD DAC, our call to action reporting and the Oslo reporting as ways and areas that we can improve. We've also heard the call for collective effort to ensure greater access to local funding for local and women's-led organizations, and that consideration could be given to options around pool funding. The discussion highlighted also the value of the GBV accountability framework as a critical tool for us to use as we're preparing and thinking through our own commitments for the roadmap. There was also, of course, today a great discussion of individual and collective commitments against the 6 outcomes. And as others have, we really welcome you to continue these discussions on the online forum. And so we'll keep that open and enable those conversations. As Katarina just said, I would like to remind you to keep an eye out for the email next week about the roadmap, the reaffirmation process and guidance, and the commitments template. And don't hesitate to reach out to us with any follow-up questions you might have relating to that. I hope this discussion has provided the inspiration to make bold, measurable commitments, and that we can all hold each other accountable to these. Saving the most important for last, we cannot thank enough our WRC colleagues for skillfully guiding us through these last 3 days and contributing to the overall success of this partners meeting. And we would also, of course, want to acknowledge Joan and Hen, who tirelessly have worked to pull us all together to have the updated roadmap. So thank you. I want to wish all of you a restful and safe weekend and an enjoyable summer, hopefully with some rest. And of course, we look forward to working with you towards our event in September. So I think there's no one further for me to turn back to, unless Kat or anybody, Joan, you have any final administrative things. But with that, I think it's a wrap.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Jillian.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
I think Kara raised her hand.
I did raise my
Oh.
hand. Can I sneak in?
Oh, sorry.
Can I just sneak in really quickly? I wanted to just
Yes.
give a very, very, very special shout out to Olivia and Katerina for all of the behind the scenes work on this new format for a meeting. There was a lot of busy work to make sure the logistics worked smoothly. And I just wanted to make sure that they were recognized for that work. So thank you so much to both of you for that. And thanks to everyone who contributed, and have a wonderful summer. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye.